I really strongly argue that you should find a profession where you have a passion for it.
Since this is an episode on passion, we've talked a lot about these guitars. I thought maybe we should have a jam. But before we do that, welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon. This is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father-son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. Today, we're going to do something a bit different. You might be wondering, why are there two guitars in our set today? I thought it would be good for us to talk about passion versus profession. Where do we draw the line, or how do we discern whether or not a passion is worth monetizing and worth building a career out of? Both of us, we are very much into guitars, specifically into blues guitar. And why did you not go into a guitar business? Why did you go into consulting?
Well, I kind of thought that I was not very good at it anyway to begin with, that I'm passionate about, I'm not going to excel in it. So I kind of consigned myself to if I went down that path, I'd probably become mediocre and probably average at doing that part of the business. And that is why it's very important for me to think about something else where I'm passionate about, but it's something that I could really excel in.
How did you define what would be counted as having a high capability or high competency? Because sometimes when you're very deep into a hobby, let's say, or a passion, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have found that when I'm so into something, that can sometimes kind of give me kind of rose-tinted glasses about my own competency in that area. Yeah. So how do you kind of remain objective about what you can and cannot do when it comes to the guitar, for example?
Guitar playing in particular, it's very simple. You look at someone in your amongst your cohort, people that you know, and you compare your standard compared to them. And then you can see that somebody else is learning it so quickly and so naturally and very easily, and you have to put so much effort to get to the same level, and that's within the circle of your friends. Then you realize that you're not as good. Then you compare how that person who is considered the best amongst your cohort, compared to some other really top-notch performers in the world, then you see the huge gap. Then you realize that for you to be able to excel at that world-class level, there's a lot of steps that you need to do. It's almost gargantuan task. So I concluded that it's not natural for me to do it. It's not an impossible thing to do, but requires quite a lot of sacrifice and hard work, simply because you don't have the natural innate capability. I would say the same thing with sports too. If you think about it, Usain Bolt. If someone that's like you and I, when we were born, we know whatever effort you and I put into it can never beat Usain Bolt. We don't have the height for it. You don't have the natural build-up to be able to do that. So you realize that although you may be passionate about running, but you realize that at some point, if you really want to excel in it, you are never going to reach that level.
Do you think that passion is necessary? Because I think even between passion and hobby, there's a distinction there. Because a passion can, I feel at least, that a passion can be something that is developed over time in an area that might not necessarily seem like an area of passion to be, at the start. So, for example, I think you, having gone into the corporate world, not pursuing being a guitar player or a rock star or blues musician, but going into the business world, maybe did that at some point feel like having to give up your passion? But then I think the follow-up to that is, in doing that, did you discover then a passion for the nature of work that you're doing?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, in life, there are many things. I call it a journey of discovery. You realize in a particular journey that you discover your real potential in certain areas. And let's talk about this idea of passion and profession, the two P's, as two circles. Imagine you have, Leon, here you have a circle called passion and you have a profession circle. And some, as you rightly pointed out, sometimes your passion can become a hobby and can become a profession. So the first option to see the circles as two separate circles. They don't overlap. That's one. Your hobby remains a hobby, or your passion is in your hobby, and your profession is something that you do for a living. And the other one is where the circle overlaps with your profession. And this intersection between the two that means you have a passion for the work that you really do. And this is a very interesting idea when the passion is actually part of your profession. But there are good and bad in that. So the good and bad is that if you have a passion for the work that you then do, it is good because you focus a lot of your attention and energy and your heart and soul into the work. Where it becomes bad is that you get confused about your true north. Because then there's the measure of true north. If your true north is to make money in the things you do, then you're passionate about a particular brand or genre of music that does not give you the money for doing it. Say blues. And blues is a small segment of the market. Pop music is a much bigger one, for example. And so if you're not exactly good at what you're doing on the pop or on the blues side, you will never really find money in your passion. And so it's very important to make sure that you deal with it. Your true north is very clear. If your true north is not clear, you then find this problem where the two circles overlap, become a very confused mess. But it's very good starting point where your passion is your profession. I really argue with people. My own experience at Leon is that I really strongly argue that you should find a profession where you have a passion for it. And if you do that, that's where you really can excel.
Yeah, because it's funny you mentioned that, because then my follow-up question to that is, you talked about what's very important is ultimately to have a very clear sense of a true north. Yeah. Our podcast is called The Game of the Impossible. And we talk a lot about setting impossible goals. Now, do you think that in the workplace, do you think that it is possible? I mean, maybe let's not just talk about work. Let's talk about just life in general. Do you think that it is actually possible to achieve impossible goals if you don't have a passion for the thing that you are pursuing?
To me, the answer is plainly no. If you don't have a passion for it, it's very difficult for you to achieve the game.
Even when you have mapped out all, let's say in the case of in consultancy, you have very sort of, you have these frameworks, you have these templates, you have these methodologies where you drill down everything to almost a science. Even at that level, do you think that you can sort of hack working around passion?
It's very tough. Not to say totally impossible, extremely difficult. And I'll tell you why. If you don't have a passion for it, you may be able to deal with immediate problems or resistance in the beginning, but you get tired of it after a while. Day in and day out, every single day, you have to deal with that. What we, in one of our episodes, we call it endurance. But if you don't have a passion for that, you don't have a long-lasting endurance to deal with resistance to change and the pain and the sacrifice involved in pursuing it. Because frankly speaking, Game of the Impossible is fraught with challenges. It's fraught with resistance. It's fraught with problems. That's why people don't pursue them. So it is, in my mind, a necessity for you to have a passion for it. Otherwise, without that, you will burn into oblivion.
I think it's, I agree with that too, because I think what sometimes helps me to decide whether it's a project or just like doing this podcast is one example, whether or not it was worth maybe considering thinking of it as something we could eventually monetize and build. I like to think of whatever the thing that you are passionate about, think of what is the most boring task. Just imagine down the line, if this were to materialize into something, what would be the most boring part of that job, so that you're not thinking about the glitz and glamour of it, but think about the most boring, mundane part of that job. And then ask yourself, would you be willing to do that for a very, very long time?
Absolutely.
Because you have to put in the hours and you have to, I think it was, I can't remember who said this, but I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk. I used to listen to him a lot when I was earlier part of my career. He's very crass, and he says to do well in life, you've just got to be willing to eat shit. So are you willing to eat shit in the pursuit of whatever it is you're trying to do? And so I find that quite a good first starting point. So essentially, if you want to simplify it, I think the first thing is, is this thing that you want to do, is it sustainable? If you are imagining yourself wanting to be a professional musician, or if you want to build guitars, you have developed a bit of a hobby of building guitars. These are not some of your builds, but you have many others in the collection which have been built by you. So let's say if you were to decide to run a business in selling some of your builds, then do you imagine that this would be sustainable over a long period of time, both in terms of the amount of effort required to build the guitars, but also would it be sustainable financially as well? Then the next thing you look at is, on that note, then monetization, right? Actually, how viable is it to really do this? If you put the fun, put the passion aside, will this objectively be something that can make money?
Absolutely.
And also be realistic about your current lifestyle needs. If you are maybe a little strapped for cash, then perhaps it's not a good idea to jump straight into something like that. Perhaps if you want to explore it, then treat it like a side gig while you're still earning from your current job. Then I think the third component is there will there be joy in the process? So even in the mundane, will you still have joy? And I really like the definition of joy because, as Christians, we talk a lot about joy. We don't talk about happiness, but we use the language of the joy of the Lord. We don't say the happiness that God or Jesus gives us, because the Christian walk, as much as we are filled with joy in the process, that doesn't mean that we are devoid of struggles and of challenges. So actually, joy is the ability to basically have joy, an inner peace and an inner joy, even amidst the storms. So even as if you're eating shit in the process, will you still have joy in eating shit? It has to be. You can't have a disproportionate amount of eating shit and not having joy. And then the other thing which you mentioned earlier is skill level. Do you realistically have the skill level, or maybe if you feel like you're not quite at the skill level yet, do you at least have the fundamentals? If we talk about, let's say, you were talking about sport earlier, then sometimes one of the factors, no matter how much work you're willing to put in, if you are just not physically gifted for a particular sport, then that's also not going to get you very far. So do you have the right skill level, or do you have the right makeup for it? And then finally, is there a market need for the thing that you are doing? And I think when we did this podcast, I kind of ran it through this framework, and it seemed to tick most of the boxes. Because is it sustainable? Well, we made it sustainable by making this a very easy setup to do. We filmed this podcast from your study in your house. We basically just use 3 cameras, so I can operate everything on my own. It's a very simple, it's a very lean team. It's just the 2 of us. I produce, I edit the videos. We have someone called Caleb who helps us with audio, but it's simple, and so at least for now, it is very much sustainable. Even if we don't grow the team very rapidly, it's very sustainable as a 2-man show. Then monetization, are there avenues for monetizing? I mean, realistically, YouTube, and social media, if you're just relying on ad revenue alone, it's not really going to cut it.
It's our gig, the speaking gigs.
But it's the gigs. And so
you made enough money to buy this guitar for me.
Fun fact, this white guitar here is actually a birthday present for my dad. He just celebrated your birthday. At the time of releasing this, then your birthday would have been a week ago. And so this was your birthday present. But we planned it, and then we saw that we might not be able to make a lot through ad revenue, but certainly this will allow us open up opportunities to do speaking engagements.
Speaking engagement is just too many. We had to turn down so many of them. Really, these are paid speaking engagement. There's some overseas, some local, and so we had to, because of prioritize our time, and so we had to say no to quite a number of them to go and pick a few. And simply because we just don't have the time to do all of them.
Exactly. So there were opportunities to monetize this. I think the big one for me was thinking about, would there be joy in the process of doing it? I mean, like putting this thing together, even though we say it's easy because we're able to run it, I'm able to just be a 1-man show in producing it, but that also means that there's a lot of extra time taken out of my schedule to do this. So my workflow is that we record on a Friday, and then basically on a Wednesday and on a Thursday, I'm working on the edits, as well as all the social media shortcuts and all of the design and graphics, all on my own. And that means that I have sacrificed my sleep on my Wednesdays and Thursdays, right? So that is my kind of eating shit, if you like. But there's so much joy in doing it.
And the thing I like most, and if you like, I want to pinpoint, is the fact that you really focus on making sure you release the episodes at 6 a.m. on Friday morning.
Yeah.
And that really is, I salute you for doing that, because that really epitomizes these two words that we always describe, discipline of action. Those two operative words. So if you say it's 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. on Friday, it's 6 a.m. on Friday. And if you keep on doing that, that's actually a habit that's enduringly very, very important for Game of Impossible.
Exactly. And you need, in order to sustain that and to drive that, that's where you need the joy.
Yeah.
The joy that exists even though you are up late at night, you have other... I have my other two jobs as well to think about. Those two things are my main gig, especially my work at the church. I've got all of those things to think about, and yet I'm still up at night putting this thing together, But there's a joy. There's a joy in knowing that. I think, first of all, we started doing this because I just wanted to spend a bit of intentional time with you, learning from you. But then I think out of that, there's a second layer of joy, and it's the joy of knowing that there are people who genuinely benefit from us having these conversations. And we would have never imagined that this would be helpful to others. I just thought it would be helpful for you, it would be helpful for me. But there are people who make this part of their weekly routine now. And so the joy is what really sustains us. And then market need. At least for now, podcasting it's very much the flavor of the week. In terms of this is kind of like it's a great platform, and so for now at least, there's certainly a market need. But I think we always talk about having a recursive problem-solving approach. So, that means for all in maybe 5 or 10 years' time, this GOI may not always exist as a podcast. It may evolve into other things as we see the needs change. But I think the crux of it, because we are very clear on what we want to achieve, and that's why we say it in the intro every week, we want to help other people to be able to transform and to understand how to achieve their game of the impossible. So as long as we are achieving that, how we get that message across doesn't really matter. If podcasts stop becoming a thing in a couple of years, then we will find another way to do that, whether it's workshops, whether it's in-person coaching, things like that. So, I mean, personally for me, I found that to be quite a helpful framework in discerning what you should potentially think about turning into a profession.
Let me give some examples of international players who have been able to put together, to live in an intersection between their passion and their profession, that intersection where they combine it. And I want to draw a real example of a young guy who is successfully in Malaysia that has done it. First of all, I want to begin by looking at Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew had a passion for nation building. He really put his heart and soul into doing it. That's where Singapore is where it is today. A lot of it hinges on what he did, because he was able to put his heart and soul into him being a leader for Singapore. Bill Gates has a passion for technology and connectivity. And you also have Elon Musk, a passion for technology and playing it in a way that's a maverick. And that he's very passionate about that. Jack Ma had a passion for e-commerce, but in particular, he was passionate about SME. That's how Alibaba became so successful, because he made sure that his passion for e-commerce and particularly for SMEs were the ones that drove the business model for Alibaba. And Eric Clapton had a passion for guitar, and he really was passionate about the blues, and he really stuck to it, and he's very, very, very successful guitarist, singer, songwriter, and everything as a result of doing that. Jesus Christ had a passion for humankind, serving human beings. So he came to earth and he did that. So those are international examples. Let me give us an example of a guy here in Malaysia who's done it. And the name is called Nick Sazwan. When I met Nick Sazwan, it must have probably been some like 18 years ago. I contacted him through a friend, and I asked him that my nephew wanted to buy a chassis for him. He built chassis for amplifiers, guitar amplifiers. So I bought it, and I had a chat with him. He said at the time that he was only interested in just building the chassis. So I said, how did you get into this in the first place? I'm just passionate about amplifiers, he said. I'm so passionate about amplifiers. And I started to build the chassis. And so he started selling them to Marshall and et cetera, some of the other established brands. So I told him, since you're passionate about amplifiers, why don't you actually build amplifiers? He said, no, at the moment, I'm only interested in building the chassis. So I told him, why don't I commission you to make an amplifier for me? So I had an all-park amplifier. You may remember that. Yep. An old one. I took out everything. I took out the chassis. I only had the box. And I gave him the park amplifier. I said, why don't you build for me an amplifier? And so he asked me, what kind of music you like? And so I told him the kind of music I like, the kind of guitar that is coming out from this music. So he kind of knew what kind of sound I wanted. 2 weeks later, he came to the house. We used to live in Taman Tun. And he built that amplifier. And so, wow, I really liked it. And I named the amplifier Eagles, actually. And I put it there. And so then we went away. We went to London, etc. I went to Malaysia Alliance. Many years later, 7 years later, I opened the newspaper. I read an article about this Nick Sazwan, who has successfully built amplifiers and sold them. And this article was put in The Edge. He said, wow, this is a man I met some 7 years ago, and he's made a name for himself by selling amplifiers. His amplifier is called Tone. And so the interesting thing is, the last time I met him and his wife, he said, how do you do this? And I asked him. I said, look, I started off selling this, and we don't have a marketing director, we don't have a marketing team. The marketing and the admin is done by my wife. The wife does that. And so how do you do it? There's just the two people that do it. So I have a team of people that do all the technical work that I require, but the design of the amplifiers is done by him. But so he's electrical engineering, that's his degree, but he's very, very passionate about amplifiers. And so he opened all the amplifiers. He told me he opened the Marshall amplifiers, Fender, and all the other amplifiers, and examined the sound, and started to produce an equivalent that is better and cheaper, and definitely better and cheaper. And why is it does not need a marketing team and a sales team? Because everything is sold via YouTube. So who are his marketing and sales people? The people who buy his guitar, and then they put YouTube about the guitar that they use and the amplifiers that they play.
Yeah, and his amps, the Cherrytone brand, has somewhat of a cult following.
It is.
They have now, since then, they've gone beyond amplifiers. They do guitar pedals as well, and very good ones at that.
Yeah, so last time I met him, I asked him, how many countries have you now been able to sell it to? More than 70 countries that he's been able to sell this. He's found a niche for himself. So the beauty today is that Nick Sazwan is an example of a guy, a Malay guy, young fellow, does not need government help. He does not go for government loan or subsidies or nothing of that sort. He just figured out how does he produce a guitar amplifier that is of top quality internationally compared to the best of brands, and how does he find a way to reach those markets instead of having a store in Kuala Lumpur. He does not have a guitar and amplifier store because he realized if he puts it on the internet, the whole world is his store. It's a whole global store. And the only person that manages this is his wife. So his wife, husband and wife team, but they have something like 20 technicians that help them with welding and building the amplifiers and etc. But fantastic example. This is an example of a man that I say had pursued and achieved a game of the impossible without being an icon. Nobody knows this guy. But I know he's extremely successful, very humble. And he says, Idris, I don't ask for government money. I'm a bumi, and I really believe that there are so many things we can complain about this world, can complain about the world, but the key here is stop complaining, do something about it. How do you do it? Find who is the best practice in the world, make your product as good and cheaper than those products, and market it through the internet. You don't need a storefront. The whole storefront is e-commerce. He has found the way how to go and reach out to 70 countries without needing to have a store. Very, very good.
Yeah, and that resonates with something that, I think has been, it's probably the driving force behind everyone who has made something of themselves or of a business, of a project. They've always just had a bias towards action. And you talk about it a lot. One of the 6 secrets of transformation is to have a discipline of action. And the reason for that is, I like this quote from Marie Forleo, who says that clarity comes from engagement and not thought. So you've got to be able to create some sort of system, whether it's in your team or whether it's for yourself, where you just allow yourself to quickly move something into action. Because so long as the idea remains in your head, you don't have anything solid to then improve on or to iterate on.
Yeah.
Even if you just start doing something and it doesn't turn out very well, as we said last week, at least you've got a proof of concept. So I think the ability to be able to action, but to be able to also have a systematic way of failing and failing well and learning from failure, I think is very, very important in anything that you want to do, whether it's wanting to build guitars, whether it's wanting to train for a marathon. You just have to do it. Put the repetitions in and see the beauty of the compound effect start to take place.
Absolutely. Very, very important. So I remember you said earlier on the saying about you have to eat a lot of shit in the process. There was one guy in Shell, when I used to work with him, he said, you have to do the ordinary thing extraordinarily well.
Yeah.
There are many parts of the thing you do is so ordinary and you're not really passionate about that part of it. So you got to do that as well. And to achieve your game, the impossible, you have to do the ordinary thing extraordinarily well. You learn from failures. Take the story about Nick Sazwan. He ran into a lot of challenges, actually. I remember when I became a minister, by the way, I bought an amplifier from him. It took him a while to build it, actually, and I asked him, why is it taking you some time? Because in jest, he said, actually, you are in a queue of 16 people, because he was really having to cope with the demand that he's putting out there. Because he said, wow, I was so impressed. I look at his website. I think his website is terrible. It's really, really boring. So I asked him, wow, Nick, your website is so terrible. How is it that you can attract people there? He found out that the real sales is not from his website because it's terrible. He admits that too. But it was really the marketing and the sales from the people who buy his amplifiers and talk about it in YouTube.
Exactly.
That's where the real sales is coming out.
And you will only be able to ascertain that if you actually do the work and produce the thing.
Produce it, yeah.
Because if you think about all the textbook ways in which you need to put in the R&D, the ways you need to think about developing the brand, all the traditional marketing funnels. Yeah, I mean, generally those are good practices to have. But then you realize that for a lot of real kind of practitioners and mavericks in their field, a lot of them, you'll realize that their channels of distribution are not the typical ones. Like, so in this case, a website, it doesn't matter that his website is crap, because he's just realized that from just putting out the stuff, actually people don't engage with the website anyway. They watch a YouTube video. From there, then they just get in touch with Nick, and then they put an order. And unless you go out and produce the thing and start to engage with the community, you're not going to be able to find out, oh, actually, this is actually the way to market. And this is coming from someone who is in marketing and in branding. So I used to think, it's so important to make sure you have the brand right. But actually, I think it's more important for people to be able to just test out the product. Because actually, if your product isn't good, you can have the best marketing strategy, but it's people are going to smell a bad product, even if you market it well. If any one of
you listeners out there, you Google under YouTube, put them Triathlon, you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of video clips of people who bought his amplifiers and talk about it.
Yes, a lot of American guitar YouTubers as well who pronounce it Soraya Tone.
Actually, interestingly enough, when I ordered my first amplifier from Proper One that he built, and I turned to the back, I had to laugh because it's not made in Malaysia, it's made in Kelantan. He's a passionate, it's a die-hard Kelantanese. Very, very good example of a guy who's out there. Another challenge he went through, just to talk about failures and challenges if you pursue this, because he was doing it as a hobby and it became a business. And he didn't run it like a normal business. So while I was a minister, I got a call from him. He said, hey, Idris, I'm running into a lot of trouble with Inland Revenue. So Inland Revenue asking him to pay backdated taxes, and for last 6 years or so, but he didn't have proper accounts, and because e-commerce it's an infancy stage at the time as well. So a lot of people that sell things like that, they don't really have proper running of business, because this man, he turned from a hobby into a passion, and in this passion it became a big profession for him. So as I said before, you have to be clear about your true north. Once you're clear about the true north, and when you run a business, you must run it as a normal business. And so I had to go and make an appeal on his behalf to the folks in Inland Revenue on his behalf, because this was the case that he was going through. And, he ran it as a small business, and eventually there was a solution around it. But the guy is now, as a result of that episode, he's put in place all the right controls, all the financial stuff that is there, so that the business can run as a normal business and it can account for it. And so, well done to Nick, because he and the wife done all the work really, because he focused on product development and design, and the wife did all the HR work, all the marketing and sales, and the accounts as well. And it's fantastic. So I really salute Nick Sazwan. Nick, if you're out there listening, salute to you. You're my hero, man. And so you're a guy that's an example of a guy that has started from nothing and really moved it. It didn't need anybody's help, simply because he put a game of the impossible. He wanted to put himself out on a pedestal as a star player in the segment of guitar amplifiers, and he successfully done it.
Maybe to close, we are Klabits from the highlands of Borneo. Well, you actually grew up in the highlands of Borneo in Barrio. I didn't. But, we were having a conversation a while ago, and, I was asking you whether or not this generation of, let's say, Klabit youth are maybe as fired up as maybe your cohort. Because, from your cohort, there have been so many, the likes of Uncle Osat, Uncle Madan, real kind of giants in their own respect. And then you mentioned, I think you said that some of that fire has maybe been lost a little bit among the youth of today in Barrio. What do you think are ways that maybe some of these bright sparks within Barrio can be able to have the tools to be able to pursue their game of impossible, much like you did?
In our case, and if I draw our examples and bring it to today's time for the young people, I would say three things. One is, at that time, we had a real sense of adventure for the world outside, beyond the mountains. We knew that the world beyond the mountain was real.
So not having exposure to it actually was, in a way, a driving force for you guys.
Yeah, it was a driving force, because we knew it. And we thought that the only way we could get to see that world was education. So that sense of adventure was the driving force. Secondly, the education, because we knew it was a passport to get to see that world was education. So we studied really hard. We were so passionate about our studies. And the third one was the sense that when you go out there, you want to be the best version of yourself. You may not be the best in the world, but the best version of yourself. I remember we all talked about it, even when we were young. And our teachers were really passionate folks that really encouraged us to do this. And we had, our principal then was asking us, every single one of us, to do what he called pinpoint your primary goal. We have stickers there, stick it on the bed, look at it every morning and every evening. That is your profession. I want to be a lawyer, and that's what I stuck there. But those were the three things. That means passion for the thing that you want to pursue. The first one was the adventure, the really seeing the world out there. and then through excelling in education because you saw the passport to get the best version of yourself. The fourth and most important aspect for us then was we were at the time in Barrio, 1973, when we were engulfed in the Barrio revival. And that was a supernatural episode. That's something that I don't see people encounter in the same sort of way. But most of us who had that encounter realized this idea of being endowed by the Holy Spirit. In Luke chapter 1, verse 37, it says, with God, nothing is impossible. And so the game, The Impossible, anchors squarely into Luke chapter 1 and 37. With God, nothing is impossible. So those are the four elements that I believe that if the kids today, whether they live in Barrio, the Klabits, whether they live in town today, if they pursue those four things there, and I think they can achieve the best versions of themselves in this world.
Yeah. Since this is an episode on passion, we've talked a lot about these guitars. I thought maybe we should have a jam.
Yeah.
So we're going to sign out this episode this week by playing you a little something and having a bit of a father-son jam session. But before we do that, we just want to say thank you so much for listening to yet another episode. Thank you for subscribing. For those who haven't already, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to our Spotify as well. We post an episode every Friday at 6 a.m. We've got episode 27 coming out next week, and there's going to be many more to come. So we look forward to seeing you then.